Kalechi walked into the family compound with the pride of a man who believed the world revolved around him. His family had money, power, and connections in Enugu, and he never failed to remind everyone of his status. Seated at the long dining table during a family gathering, he leaned back in his chair and smirked at his wife, Amarachi, who was quietly serving food. "See her," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "A village girl pretending to be a lady. She doesn't even know which fork to use for the salad." Laughter rippled through the room as his relatives joined in, amused at Amarachi's supposed ignorance. Kalechi's sister, Ngozi, clapped her hands and teased, "Brother, next time teach her before she embarrasses us again." The mockery continued like entertainment, with every mistake, real or imagined, turned into a joke at Amarachi's expense. She walked gracefully, placing plates before them, her head slightly lowered, her face calm. The sting of their words was sharp, but her smile never left her lips. She neither defended herself nor snapped back. Instead, she listened in silence, each insult sinking into her heart like stones into water, but never disturbing the stillness on the surface. Kalechi grew louder, relishing the attention. "I told you all, I married her out of pity. Imagine, someone like me settling for this." The words struck deep, but Amarachi's expression didn't change. She simply turned, adjusted her wrapper neatly, and continued her duties with quiet elegance. A few of the older relatives exchanged uneasy glances. There was something unsettling about her calmness, as though she carried a knowledge none of them could grasp. As the evening went on, the laughter and ridicule grew, but so did the silent strength in her smile. It wasn't the smile of a defeated woman. It was the smile of someone who knew time would tell her story better than words could. And in that moment, as she poured water into Kalechi's glass, and he sneered at her again, she lifted her eyes briefly, just enough for him to see. Behind the calmness was a secret waiting to break free, a truth strong enough to silence every mocking voice at the table. Ngozi leaned forward in her chair, her voice sharp and dripping with mockery. "Amarachi, you should be grateful my brother even looked your way. Do you know how many educated, sophisticated women were lining up for him? And yet here you are, straight from the village, sitting in our father's house as if you belong." Her words drew laughter from the cousins, who whispered behind their hands, repeating the same phrase, "Village girl." It echoed like a chant around the table, each repetition meant to cut deeper into Amarachi's heart. Kalechi leaned back proudly, enjoying the drama, nodding as though his sister's ridicule confirmed his own superiority. "Ngozi is right," he said with a sneer. "You should at least try to act refined. My family deserves a woman who knows how to host guests, not someone who looks lost at every gathering." Amarachi's cheeks burned, but she refused to let her pain show. She moved gracefully from one side of the table to the other, refilling glasses, serving food, and responding to insults with a soft, "Yes, sister," or a quiet nod. She did not raise her voice, nor did she argue. Her silence made her look small to them, but inside, it was the silence of someone holding something far bigger than their scorn could ever touch. Some of the elders shifted uncomfortably, watching her composure. They had seen women break under less cruelty, but Amarachi remained steady, her eyes gentle, her movements careful, as though she was teaching them what dignity looked like. Even when Ngozi laughed loudly and said, "If not for my brother, you would still be pounding yam in some dusty kitchen in the village," Amarachi only smiled faintly, wiping the edge of the table with a napkin. The whispers of shame swirled around her like smoke, yet she walked through it untouched. Though they called her a village girl, there was something in her posture, something in the way she carried herself, that hinted at a hidden strength. None of them noticed it yet, but in time, the same people mocking her would bow their heads in silence before her truth. The house that once held laughter now felt like a cage. Kalechi no longer hid his disdain when they were alone. He would return from work, loosen his tie, and look at Amarachi with eyes full of contempt. "Do you know why I married you?" he spat one evening, his voice heavy with arrogance. "It wasn't love, it was pity. I thought I was doing you a favor, dragging you out of that wretched village life. But maybe I made a mistake. Maybe you don't belong here at all." His words struck like daggers, leaving Amarachi trembling. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see the tears streaming down her cheeks. Nights grew colder as silence stretched between them. Kalechi refused to eat her meals, criticizing the way she cooked, the way she dressed, even the way she walked. "You embarrass me," he said, his voice hard as stone. "One day, I will send you back where you came from, and you will thank me for sparing you the shame of staying here." Each insult tore at her heart, but Amarachi held her pain close, never lashing back. She cried quietly into her pillow, her sobs muffled by the walls, but with every tear, something inside her was changing. In the mornings, she rose before him, sweeping the compound, preparing his meals, ironing his clothes with the same steady hands. But now there was a difference. Her silence was no longer weakness. It was strength taking root. She stopped asking him for affection. She stopped pleading for his kindness. Instead, she poured her energy into small acts that reflected her inner resolve. Her smile became gentler, her words fewer, but her presence carried a quiet dignity that could not be shaken. Kalechi mistook her silence for surrender, believing he had broken her spirit. But Amarachi was no longer the woman clinging desperately for his approval. She was a woman, carrying pain like a burden, yet shaping it into hidden strength. Each cruel word he threw at her was a stone, and unknowingly, Kalechi was helping her build the foundation of a strength he would one day come to fear. The evening was quiet, the kind of silence that settled after dinner when the family lounged in the sitting room. Suddenly, the rumble of engines broke the calm. Bright headlights swept across the compound walls as a convoy of sleek black SUVs rolled through the gates. The tires crunched against the gravel, and the security man scrambled to open the way, his hands trembling. Everyone inside the house rushed to the windows, confused and startled. Such an arrival was not common. It was the kind of entrance reserved for men of power. Kalechi frowned, irritated by the disturbance. "Who dares to come here like this?" he muttered, rising to his feet. His relatives followed, curiosity buzzing in their whispers. The doors of the SUVs opened in perfect rhythm, and out stepped tall, suited men with earpieces, scanning the compound with sharp eyes. Then, from the largest car, a figure emerged, Chief Obinna. His reputation traveled faster than his name, a man of immense wealth, power, and influence, known across the city for commanding respect wherever he went. The family gasped in unison. What could bring such a man to their home? Chief Obinna did not look at anyone else. His eyes, sharp yet kind, searched the space until they landed on Amarachi, who had just stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her wrapper. For a moment, silence stretched. Then his deep voice carried across the compound. "I am here for Amarachi." The words froze everyone in place. Kalechi's jaw dropped. His relatives glanced at one another in confusion, and Ngozi's mocking smile faltered. Amarachi stood still, her heart pounding, unable to understand why such a man would call her name with such certainty. Chief Obinna stepped forward, ignoring the stares, and repeated firmly, "Where is Amarachi? I must speak with her." The air grew heavy, and the once mocking household fell into stunned silence. No one could comprehend what was unfolding before their eyes. The woman they dismissed as a nobody was suddenly the focus of a man whose very presence commanded fear and reverence. The compound was silent, every eye fixed on Chief Obinna as he stepped forward with the authority of a man used to commanding a room. He looked at Amarachi with eyes that carried both pain and relief, and when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "Amarachi," he said, "you are not who they think you are. You are my daughter." Gasps erupted from every corner of the sitting room. Kalechi staggered back into his chair, staring at Amarachi as if she were a stranger. Ngozi covered her mouth in disbelief, her earlier arrogance melting into shock. Amarachi's knees weakened, her hands trembling as she tried to understand his words. "Your daughter?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Chief Obinna nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. "Yes, my child. Years ago, when your mother died, my enemies sought to destroy everything connected to me. To protect you, you were hidden far from the life of wealth and danger. I searched, but fate kept you out of reach. Until now." The room erupted into murmurs, but Obinna raised a hand, silencing. His eyes never left Amarachi. "You grew up without my protection, yet I see strength in you. You chose to live humbly, never boasting, never exposing your true bloodline. That dignity is the mark of your mother, and it confirms what my heart already knows." Tears spilled down Amarachi's cheeks, her chest heaving as truth unraveled the years of pain she had carried. The insults, the scorn, the belittling, suddenly they all seemed small in the shadow of the revelation. Her silence had not been weakness, but the quiet of a woman who belonged to something greater than anyone had imagined. Chief Obinna stretched out his hand, his voice trembling with pride. "Come to me, my daughter. It is time the world knows who you truly are." The entire household stood frozen. The same people who mocked her as a village girl now looked upon Amarachi with wide, fearful eyes, realizing the woman they despised was heir to a legacy far beyond their reach. Kalechi felt the strength drain from his body as if the ground had betrayed him. He stumbled backward and collapsed into the nearest chair, his hands gripping the armrests, his chest rising and falling in panic. The words of Chief Obinna still rang in his ears. "Amarachi is my daughter." His eyes darted to his wife, the woman he had called a village girl, the woman he had mocked and humiliated. She stood quietly, her eyes lowered, but now her silence spoke with a power he could not comprehend. The room was suffocating with tension. His sister Ngozi, who had laughed the loudest at Amarachi, was frozen in place, her mouth slightly open, her eyes refusing to meet Amarachi's. The cousins whispered among themselves, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame. Each face in the room mirrored disbelief, but none carried it heavier than Kalechi. He pressed a trembling hand to his forehead, sweat beading along his temple. This cannot be, he muttered, his voice shaking. My wife? An heiress? Chief Obina's gaze swept across the room, his tone firm and undeniable. Yes, greater wealth than any of you could imagine flows in her blood. She is not the charity case you believe. She is the rightful heir to my fortune, my legacy. Kalechi's eyes clouded with regret. Every insult, every careless word he had thrown at Amarachi now returned to stab him deeper than any blade. He remembered calling her unworthy, threatening to send her back to the village. Yet here she was, revealed as someone far above him in standing, yet still holding herself with humility. The relatives shifted uneasily, shame written across their faces. The laughter that once filled the house had turned to silence heavy as stone. For the first time, Kalechi saw his wife not as the quiet woman he could dismiss, but as someone whose dignity and worth had always been greater than his pride. His body shook as realization settled. In his blindness, he had mocked the very crown now shining before him. The silence in the room was deafening. All eyes turned to Amarachi, expecting her to either cry with joy or boast in triumph. But she did neither. She stood tall, her wrapper neatly tied, her face calm, her posture steady. For the first time, her voice filled the space, not soft and timid as before, but firm and clear. I remained silent, she began, her eyes sweeping across the faces of those who had mocked her. Because wealth does not define respect. Character does. Her words sliced through the air sharper than any blade. The relatives who once laughed at her shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to meet her gaze. Even Ngozi, whose tongue had been the sharpest, lowered her head in shame. Amarachi's voice held no anger, only truth. You measured me by the size of my background, by the things I did not have, yet you failed to measure yourselves by kindness, by humility, by respect. Kalichi, still slumped in the chair, trembled as he listened. He had never seen his wife like the same woman he had called weak now radiated strength that humbled him. Amarachi turned to him, her eyes filled with quiet pain but also dignity. Every insult, every humiliation, I endured not because I was powerless, but because I knew that true power is restraint. I chose silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I understood that respect is earned by character, not by titles or riches. The room remained frozen, her words echoing in their hearts. Chief Obina's face softened with pride as he nodded at his daughter, recognizing the spirit of her late mother in her voice. Amarachi did not raise her tone, yet the entire household felt smaller before her. Her dignity was a crown, invisible yet undeniable, one no one could strip away. In that moment, the wealthy family who had looked down on her finally saw her for who she truly was, not because of the fortune revealed, but because of the grace and strength she carried within her all along. Chief Obina's presence filled the room like thunder before rain. He rose to his full height, his agbada flowing with authority, his voice calm yet commanding. From this day forward, he declared, Amarachi will inherit my estate and oversee my businesses. She is the rightful heir, and her word carries weight equal to mine. His announcement struck like lightning, leaving the entire family stunned. The same mouths that once called her a village girl now hung open in disbelief. Kalechi's relatives glanced at one another nervously, their arrogance crumbling into fear. Ngozi, who had mocked Amarachi the most, clutched her wrapper tightly, her proud face now pale with regret. One cousin tried to stammer a protest, but Chief Obina silenced him with a sharp wave of his hand. You will never again disrespect her. Not in word, not in action. If you dare, you dishonor me, and I will not forgive. The weight of his warning pressed heavily on everyone in the room. For the first time, Amarachi stood not as the quiet wife they scorned, but as the woman they must answer to. Heads began to bow, not out of love, but out of necessity. The very people who laughed at her now mumbled apologies, their voices shaky. Amarachi did not gloat, nor did she smile triumphantly. She stood with the same quiet dignity she had always carried. Her humility only deepened the sting for those who mocked her, for they realized she had been above them all along, without ever needing to boast. Kalechi sat frozen, his mind reeling, watching as his powerful relatives bent their pride before the woman he had belittled. Chief Obina turned to him last, his gaze stern. You, above all, must learn respect. Wealth does not make a man, character does. If you wish to remain by her side, you must understand this truth. The tables had turned completely. The mocked wife was now the crown of the family, the one they would have to honor and obey. And in that moment, the household knew life would never be the same again. Kalechi sat motionless, his pride shattered like glass on the floor. The weight of the revelation pressed heavily on his chest until he could no longer breathe in silence. Slowly, he rose from his chair and sank to his knees before Amarachi. His voice trembled, stripped of arrogance. Amarachi, my wife, forgive me, I was blind. I mocked you, humiliated you, treated you as less than you are. Yet all this time, you carried yourself with patience and strength greater than I could ever understand. Tears filled his eyes. his words tumbling out like a desperate confession. I see now that it was not pity that brought me a wife. It was grace. You endured my cruelty without hatred. You stood dignified when I tore you down. Please, give me another chance. His relatives watched in silence, stunned by the sight of the proud man they knew, bowing low before the woman he once despised. Amarachi's eyes softened, though the hurt in her heart was still fresh. She stepped closer, her hands folded neatly before her voice calm yet firm. Kalechi, forgiveness is not a gift handed carelessly. You wounded me with your words and your scorn. You treated me as though I was nothing, while I gave you everything I had. But even in pain, I remembered one truth. Marriage is not about pride. It is about humility, sacrifice, and respect. He lifted his head, hope flickering in his eyes. Then you will forgive me? He pleaded. Amarachi held his gaze for a long moment before answering. I will give you another chance, but only on one condition, that you learn humility, not with words, but with actions. You must prove that you understand respect, not only for me, but for everyone you once looked down on. Her words carried more power than any punishment could. Kalechi nodded, tears streaming freely. In that moment, he realized this second chance was not just forgiveness, it was his final test. The household that once mocked Amarachi now looked at her with reverence. She stood in the center of the grand living room, her presence commanding respect without her needing to raise her voice. No longer the woman whispered about as a village girl, she now carried herself as a queen in her own right, dignified, graceful, unshaken. Chief Obina stood proudly by her side, but it was Amarachi's calm strength that filled the room with authority. Every relative, from the loudest cousin to the sharp-tongued Ngozi, kept their heads bowed, ashamed of the cruelty they had once shown her. Kalechi stood behind her, humbled and quiet, his arrogance gone. He had learned the hardest lesson of his life, that pride can destroy, but humility can heal. Amarachi glanced at him, her gaze steady, reminding him that his journey was just beginning. Forgiveness was given, but trust would have to be rebuilt with patience and humility. Then Amarachi turned to address the entire family, her voice strong and unwavering. You measured wealth in gold and property. You mocked me because I came from little. But now you see true wealth is not in money. It is in dignity. It is in grace. It is in character. Her words hung in the air like a solemn truth no one could deny. The very people who once laughed at her now nodded, unable to look her in the eye. Chief Obina smiled with pride, but even he knew this moment belonged to Amarachi. She had endured humiliation and pain, yet she rose above it with a spirit no riches could buy. She had become the teacher, the example, the crown of the family. As the evening drew to a close, Amarachi stood tall at the entrance of the house, the fading sun casting a glow around her figure. In that silence, her closing words echoed in every heart. Sometimes the one you look down upon is the one destined to lift you higher.